All right, welcome everybody to our second lecture for week 3 of CSC 744. This lecture I'm going to keep relatively short, probably that 10 to 20 minute range here. And as I want today and kind of from today moving into next week to focus on just more of the discussion. So I'll be taking some time, over today, tonight, and probably tomorrow to get into the discussion, really read the feedback and hopefully engage a little bit more with that. On top of that, give you guys plenty of time to, excuse me, work through the discussion item for week 3, which is obviously going to bleed into week 4. As I mentioned here, as we kind of progress into the semester, I'll start to move away from the discussion items. And so with that, I'm not going to strictly stick to a week-to-week schedule. So, excuse me again. You'll see that here as we move into this week. So this discussion item is going to be largely based off of the articles that I uploaded into the PDF, or it's almost exclusively based off of that. And the goal there is just to read through those and try to learn from other academic research into this area. Again, management and leadership and teams it's all can be very difficult. It can be so subjective, and so my goal, my approach has always been to learn as much as I can from everybody else, and then figure out what tools, what processes work for me in my particular situation, knowing that I have no set of tools. The way I manage my the contractors I work with at this point, the students that work for me, and the way that I manage as the guard, as an Intel officer, I manage the Intel shop, they're completely different. There's some overlap with there, definitely, but I don't take the same approach with each one because the people are different, and so I tailor that, customize that very much. So again, just trying to learn through those PDFs, learn through that research, and learn through especially projects like large open source projects that are going to be different than a team of developers that's getting paid to develop a set of projects for a company. So look at the item and then just provide your insights, your thoughts, and your answers here, and we'll certainly use that here going forward for the next week. That's about it for now. These are more or less our initial assignments here. So I said, well, I'll probably generate an assignment in the first 3 or 4 weeks. Well, these are it. This is how we're doing it for right now. We're just using discussion items. That's why I went back and added some due dates and assigned some grade items. So you'll see I'll create a grade item for there as well. So and get those graded. Okay, I'm a little behind, so I apologize for that, but I will get that done shortly. Videos are going to YouTube, and please, if you have any issues with those, let me know. I'm on a Mac this year and I haven't had one before, and I'm realizing that QuickTime, which is the screen capture software that I'm using right now just because it's built in, it generates very large files. I think the quality is good, but the files are large. YouTube seems to be handling them fine, but let me know if you run into any issues, and also if you have any thoughts on using YouTube versus the traditional way that D2L provides videos. I'd love to hear that. Let's see. So with that, I'll go ahead and close, and we'll get into the slides. I'll get these slides uploaded to D2L. As you can see here, it's a pretty short deck, just kind of wrapping up the management. Again, we'll probably look at a little more of that next week, just because reading through everybody's introduction, that does seem to be what most people are hoping to get out of the course, and so I want to adjust and accommodate for that, and cover more leadership management topics. And so it's a computer science course, and we're going to have to get into computer science at some point, but I'll probably delay that a little bit longer to do that. You'll probably also see a survey item that I'll put out there for you guys to just give me some early course feedback, and that I'll use really largely, heavily weighted, to try to drive where I go with the rest of the semester. Since we're such a small class, we have the ability to do that. So as I'm starting to look towards, we're starting to look up to kind of wrap up this topic. If you guys have other areas you'd like to explore, other things you'd like to talk about, perfect time to let me know, because we can do that. We're small, and I'm not on any particular hard and fast course syllabus or course schedule. All right, so we'll get this full screen here. So effective management, we're still in this topic, and what we wrapped up with, what we talked about and more or less wrapped up with earlier this week was managing down. And managing down meaning that you're taking care of those team members that are directly reporting to you or that you're directly responsible for. That is important. That is going to be the core of your job. That's going to be the most time-consuming portion of the job. That's where most of your energy is going to be focused in the job, is managing those that report to you. Now, with that being said, these other ways of looking at managing, okay, this is just ways of looking at it. Managing out, managing yourself. These are It's hard to say they're equally critical, they're more, they're less, but they just still play a very significant role as your effectiveness your effectiveness as a manager. So we're going to look at up, out, and yourself in just a few slides, just to give you some ideas, some things to think about. Again, I'm not offering a set of tools. I'm not offering a set of tools in a sense that, I'm not giving you a policy or a formula for successful management, but just tools to put in your tool set, situations and scenarios to think through so that when you're put in those situations, you know how to react. You've maybe thought about it before and hopefully thought about it before. So it's not something new to you. So you can react well. You can react efficiently, effectively, fairly, all those things that will make you a successful manager. So with that, we'll start by managing up. And what managing up more or less boils down to is managing your boss. If you have more than one boss, that happens, although it's relatively uncommon. Managing your boss, a series of bosses, or your boss's boss. Okay, this can be big, this can be small. It all depends on the organization that you work in. Oftentimes, though, you're the most concerned about the person that you report directly to and the person that they report directly to. Larger organizations, you might be much further down on the food chain or the chain of command. Smaller organizations, you may not be. As you move up in management, of course, you're going to get closer and closer to that top level management. Oftentimes that is the goal, is to get into management, to go from that first level manager to that second level, that third level, go from managing programmer to director to vice president to a president, or whatever the C-level, that executive level board or position would be. But with that, we're looking at we're starting off earlier in our career, so we're managing the programmers. We're kind of that first level of management here. And so we care about our boss and our boss's boss. And the reason we care about that being effective to them is that they're the ones that write our review. They're the ones that typically ultimately determine our success, our career in that organization, in that company. And so it can oftentimes take a lot of effort and energy in just making sure that they understand what's going on. Communication is the key to everything. It's the key to this as well. And that you're able to effectively communicate to them what your team's up to, what they're doing, when they're doing it, the obstacles that they're running into, the obstacles that you're running into as their manager. Maybe you have a team and you don't have the team that you need, and so their performance is going to be a reflection upon you and upon your leadership style and your leadership. And if you don't have the people you need, it's going to reflect on you. And if you're not explaining to your bosses what's going on, they might not understand that. Maybe they might just think that you're ineffective as a manager. To me, there's this fine line that we walk, that we have to, as managers, we have to look at taking care of ourselves and taking care of our people. And oftentimes those two are one and the same, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're going to get in a situation where you have to make that choice on whether you throw your team or a team member under the bus, because it's not necessarily you throw them under the bus, but maybe they did something wrong, and you have to say, this one I can't take the bullet for. You're going to provide protection. Your team will recognize when you provide them protection, and they will appreciate it. But sometimes you cannot provide that protection because it would be at the detriment to your career. If you choose to do that, that's fine. That's great. That's noble. But it can be at the detriment of your career. And so, it's up to you to determine that line that you're going to toe, or those bounds that you're going to create on how much protection you'll provide. The point with all that, then, again, is that while I've been saying, and it will become the priority of your job to manage those that report to you, that can't be at the exclusion of everything else. It's got to consume most of your time, but it can't consume all of your time. You need to be very proactive and active and deliberate in how you're engaging your boss. Now, bosses can be a variety of people. I have worked for a variety of bosses, and some of them are very technical, some of them are not. And communication then can become critical with them. A couple jobs ago, I've talked about a startup that I worked for, and my boss there, we had a very strange team setup. We had a flat team. We had three developers, relatively small, and so therefore the manager, the owner, didn't think we needed a team lead or a managing programmer. So what did this lead to? This led to him being the one that did a lot of that. Now, he wasn't very technical, and so he didn't understand all of the challenges and all the obstacles that we were facing, because we were flat, because he was managing us individually and individually assigning us tasks, more or less, broadly speaking, the three of us were kind of isolated from each other. We had obviously overlap, but we were also working on very different and distinct projects. And so when we ran into issues, it was hard for him to have that oversight into what was going on. He wasn't very technical, and that's where a lot of the issues came from. The lack of being technical, and then I think the flat team environment, which to me was not a good idea. I think someone always needs to be accountable and understand what the developers are up to help them understand, to help leadership, to help those above that manager level understand what's going on the development team, understand the processes, the hurdles, the obstacles they face, and the time that it's going to take to get things done. So understanding what your boss is like, is going to be critical. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't tell him the same things. You just have to adjust your approach based off of the level of technical detail that he needs to be. Sometimes you just need to distill it down to, this project is complicated, we're running into technical issues, and it's going to take longer than we expected. Or what you're asking, while it seems simple on the surface, is going to take a lot longer than what you think. So you still need to be able to communicate. If he's technical, then you can get into the details and say, well, these are the actual obstacles. This is why it's going to take us more than 3 weeks or 4 weeks or double the original quote to get this project done, because we're running into these very technical issues. And if he's kept up, maybe he has some insight. Maybe he has experience in some other organization where something similar was done, and he can help point you guys in the right direction. So, understanding his level, his or her level. I kind of take the book's approach here. I generally just talk as a manager being a he, just because all of my managers have been men. Obviously, it can be men, it can be women. It doesn't matter. A leader's a leader. The manager's the manager. So that's the only reason I'm doing that. How much feedback and how much communication with your boss? Well, that's going to depend largely on your boss. Again, I'm sure we've all worked for people. Some of them were very hands-on, and they wanted to know the nitty-gritty. They wanted to know the details of what was going on with the team. They wanted to know personal issues. They wanted to know. They absorbed a lot. And some of them didn't. Some of them they were busy. They just didn't care. They were disengaged, a variety of reasons. But they just wanted to know the big picture. What was going on, and when are we going to make deadlines, and are we going to make it or not? And if not, you need to fix it. So understanding that about your boss will be key in shaping and forming how you approach them and how you communicate with them. Again, bottom line is communication and feedback. Just as you're going to set those expectations with your team, you want the same opportunity afforded to you. And so if a manager is not giving you feedback, then don't be afraid to approach them on it and say, this is something that is bothering me. This is something that I need in order to be effective. It never hurts to go to a manager and let them know that. But I guess I say that with some caution, because some managers will react differently. And again, we're working with personalities and people. And so if you're just unsure, there is going to be some time period, just like you have to get to know your team, the team has to get to know you, that you have to do the same with your manager if they're new. And kind of, test tentatively different areas, poke and prod here and there, to figure out how they like to work, how they like to communicate, what are their limitations. Hopefully you don't stumble across any significant ones, too abruptly, but it's all part of the process. So, timing. Okay, when does your boss want to hear from you? Okay, that's all just ties into what we just talked about. You need to know, you need to communicate with them. They need to communicate with you, and just figuring out the timing of that. Again, some of them are going to be very hands-on, some of them are not. Some of them are going to be very structured, some of them are not. And if they're in the absence of structure, it never hurts. You can propose, you can schedule times, you can say, I want my weekly meeting with you to be, Friday afternoons. We'll recap the week, we'll look at the week going forward. It's your time then to provide them feedback, and them the same to you. You can do it monthly, you can do it bi-weekly, whatever you want. But don't be afraid if that manager isn't doing that to be proactive in those regards. It's never going to hurt to at least propose those things. And if your boss doesn't take you up on that, well, then there's a problem somewhere. There's a problem. It's his problem, I guess, in a lot of ways. But it can become a significant challenge if they're just not engaging. And in that case, it gets tricky. It really does. I've been through that before, again, with some personal issues, and it can be very tough to deal with a boss that just either doesn't understand, doesn't care, isn't receptive to the communication process, feedback, giving it and receiving it. And so then, sometimes, honestly, it comes down to happiness and overall enjoyment of the organization. And sometimes it's just not enough, and you have to look to move on. But oftentimes, you can be proactive, and you can help push that. As a manager, what I've run across, especially when I was, first doing it, I don't know what I don't know. and oftentimes that I simply didn't understand how I was being perceived or how my people how they were perceiving me, and so allowing them to give me that feedback to grow, that became very critical. Be a model employee. Yeah, okay, for the most part. I mean, you're going to want to rattle the cage there every once in a while. Again, you are the advocate for your team, and sometimes you'll have to step up and cause a scene, cause an issue, raise the flag when it's on behalf of your team and yourself as well. Pick your battles. You don't have to fight everything. Nobody likes, I don't think most people anyway, enjoy working with someone that's always going to be combative, that always wants to argue every single point, wants to argue minutia, and just constantly challenging authority. Okay, that gets to be very burdensome and troublesome as a manager, both when you're managing someone, if you have an employee or a team member that's like that, or when you're being like that to somebody else. Handle problems at the lowest level. I would say that most upper level leadership, they want you to handle it as low as you can. You can take care of it in-house. If you and your team can resolve the issue, then great. They're going to be happy that you did that, and quite frankly, I don't think they're going to necessarily care if they ever find out about it. So try to handle as much as you can at the lowest possible level, and only elevate when you need to. Only get those higher level managers involved if you need to. It never hurts to volunteer. It never hurts to be proactive. Again, you've got to caution that with being too proactive and volunteering too much, because while it may help you look good, if by you volunteering, you're essentially volunteering your team, it can add a lot of burden to them. And so you just need to be very careful on how proactive you're being. I say this, and this is kind of one of those, I don't like to be, I'm not one of those people that like to do things for the sake of being visible about it. I don't go work at a soup kitchen because I want people to see that I work at a soup kitchen. But the reality of it is that sometimes you have to do that kind of stuff. Sometimes if your company's hosting a picnic and you're cooking hamburgers, it's good for you to be that person that's actually the one grilling. It's good publicity for yourself. And so as odd as it can be, as comfortable as it can be, because maybe it just goes against your personality completely, it never hurts to brand yourself, to market yourself, and do things that are visible from time to time. Again, that's tough for me to even say, but again, I think it's the reality of the world. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in the back of your head. That every once in a while it doesn't hurt. And ultimately, I'd say solve problems, don't become one. And if you can live by that, if you can manage by that, I think you'll be effective and successful. So managing up. Remember, that's significant consequence to your career, to you and your career. So take it very serious. How you are perceived by those that are the ones that are rating you, that are promoting you, that are reviewing you, is critical. If you're the most effective manager, the greatest manager in the world, but everybody else thinks that you're not, then perception is oftentimes reality. So manage how you and your team are perceived in order to really be successful. Managing out, we've kind of talked about this one throughout the last couple weeks here, so I won't spend a lot of time here. Managing out is managing interactions with other departments. Okay, departments, organizations, your peers outside of your company. All right. Again, it's very important because oftentimes you're going to be the mouthpiece, the representative for your team, and so setting a good tone, building good relationships will go a long way. Anybody that's worked in any organization, anything at all, you'll find that if you're new to it, within the first 2 or 3 days, you already start learning the politics of the organization. And politics, even though you think, well, gee, we're all on the same team, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. You realize that with those politics, people will actively, they'll go out of their way to try to, if they find out that you start to get personality conflicts, they'll go out of their way to make things hard for you, which can ultimately degrade the success of the organization, of the company. And this seems to be a problem the larger the organization gets, but it can be significant at any level and at any size. And so trying to minimize or prevent those as the best as possible, that becomes very critical, because again, sometimes your interaction with a department can have a negative consequence. If you're not being cooperative or you're being argumentative or whatever, it can have a negative consequence on your team as well and how other people interact with them. Communicate. Again, just can't stress that enough. Setting clear understandings and expectations. What can your department do? What can your team do? And what they can't do. So, sometimes explaining what they can't do is just as important as saying what they can do. So just making sure that people understand your role and your mission and your focus. And I wouldn't stop there. Understand other departments. Take time to get to understand what how can you support, or how does what you work on impact operations or accounting, or if you have a company or work at a company that has a call center. Get to know those other organizations. Get to understand how other departments within your organization work, because again, it'll make you much more effective overall as a manager. And again, bottom line to me is everybody's on the same team. And when you start having people that are making life difficult, making the job difficult, and it only hurts the organization, and that's not good for anybody. So managing out, very important. Okay, managing out. So there's other relationships than just those other departments. There's actions. There's things you do. There's things you have to do when you interact with these other departments. And so managing your team usually just isn't enough. How effective are you with HR actions? How effective are you with the hiring process, the firing process, with promotions, getting the reviews in on time? Fighting for your people if they think they need more money, if you think they need less money to prove a point. How efficient are you? Other people's jobs depend on you doing your job. Other people's jobs depend on you submitting your reviews. So when you don't submit those reviews, people notice it because you're holding up their job, and it gets to be frustrating. And then you can oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes get looked at as less effective, because if you can't get your reviews in on time, you must not care about them. And your reviews are how you evaluate your people. So then you must not really care about your people. And this kind of have this waterfall cascading effect. Budgeting and financial planning. It's a big part. You're managing now. You're taking care of salaries, or at least your portion of how that is managed. You're not probably defining how much you're going to get necessarily, but you can. That can be a part of your long-term planning for your team. Is we've identified a place where we have so much work. We need another programmer. So now defining the position, defining the role, defining how much you're willing to pay them, and working with the financial planners in the organization to get that on board. That becomes a huge portion of getting a new employee. You can't just say, I need one, let's hire some guy and let's pay him $100,000 a year on top of it. That's a significant salary for an organization to handle. And so it gets to be it's very important that your budget and your planning is on track, that you can not only manage the money you have and the day-to-day expenses that you have. You're going to have to buy tools, you're going to have to buy software kits, you're going to have to buy all sorts of software and stuff, but you can also plan it effectively too. Not just for hiring, but look at travel and training. Conferences, letting your developers go out and interact with other developers. Maybe the training's local. Maybe there's a lot of great groups that they can go to. Sioux Falls, I think, is a good example of that. They're one of the larger cities here that's around the campus. There's a lot of programmer meetup groups. You give your guys time to go and engage with those and talk to other developers. See what other people are doing. It helps keep them on the cutting edge. It helps keep you on the cutting edge. It's not to say that you're always going to use that information, but it's always good to have. And sometimes you need to send people somewhere for some hardcore training. Maybe they need a week of learning how to do Android applications or iOS applications or something. That stuff can get very expensive. Travel usually is the minimal cost, and that's significant. But the training itself can get very expensive. So just being able to identify when and if that's needed, if it's a valued part of your team and how you want to manage them, and then being able to provide those opportunities and forecast out. Make sure that you ask for the money. If it's 10 grand to send somebody to a week-long training somewhere, you better put that in your financial plan for the upcoming year. Don't forget, you'll also be managing external customers. Okay, so you might have, my one bullet there, marketing company example. To me, that was I've worked for a couple, and as the more or less the senior developer, lead developer, manager, I was often the business's face to the client. As a programmer, the senior programmer, the manager, I would go and interact with the customers a lot. And so it was up to me to work with those customers, interact with them, communicate with them directly on issues, on projects, working on even though I wasn't always the one doing the work. And so their perception of the organization, the effectiveness of the organization, largely depend on their interactions with me and how well the project. I've often seen projects that maybe the project itself, whatever was produced, wasn't the greatest thing, but because there was a strong relationship there, that saved the day. That kept the client coming back because they liked the people that they worked with. They liked the responsive nature. They liked the personalities. Those type of things can really have a huge impact on those external relationships. And vendors too. You're going to eventually have a vendor relationship or numerous vendor relationships. And so even though they're a vendor, you're paying them for a service. they're important. They're an important part of your team because even though they are a service and there may be other options for getting a vendor of that type from somebody else, sometimes it's very limited, and sometimes it's going to be very hard to switch. And so making sure that they're people too, and if they don't like working with you, it can have an impact on how quickly they service requests and help you guys out. Build your professional network. Okay, every opportunity that you have to meet someone, meet with them, try to identify common things, and try to expand and build your network. I think that building your network is something that I try to do myself personally. I try to stress to my students that are maybe at the undergrad, or definitely at the undergraduate level, and then anybody that I manage. Go out, meet people, build your network. If it's a vendor, build it. If it's an internal, somebody internal to the company, build it. And just because it'll pay dividends. So just, it's a small world, and building your network is very huge, very important. This kind of goes towards, we're focused on the success of this company, this concept of company that we're working for. But let's say the time comes for you to move on. Oftentimes your professional network is going to be where you're going to want to turn to in order to find that job. You'll see, especially in the technology world, that I've seen a lot of good developers that had a strong network move jobs because someone in their network said, oh, I know somebody that's looking for something, they need some work, they need some help, it's a startup, it's a company, it's growing, they're expanding, I know they'll pay good money, you should check them out. And you'll have a job offer, this guy will get a job offer informally before you even know what hits you. So that can work against you, that can work for you, it all depends. But as an individual, having a very robust and solid network will pay dividends. Managing yourself. This is the last thing I really want to talk about. So don't forget, you do need to manage yourself. That can be oftentimes the hardest thing to do. Perception is oftentimes reality. So we are oftentimes perceived differently than what we expect. I wish I had a magic, some way of saying this is how you can test how other people perceive us or perceive you, because I certainly haven't figured it out. The way I try to do it is just by talking to people, receiving feedback, and asking some probing questions when I have the opportunity to. So there are some things we can manage. Oftentimes people say, well, I am who I am and I'm not going to change that. And that's more or less true. I mean, I'm one of those that believe people can change, and people do change. They change oftenly, and they change based off environment and circumstances and age and all sorts of things. But there are some definite things we can change. We can change our style. We can change how we manage. We can be very aware and cognizant of it. And we can also be very deliberate in not wanting to change that. That's up to us, though, I think. We can change our appearance, right? I can show up in a place wearing sandals, shorts, and a Hawaiian t-shirt. I can show up in a suit. It all depends on the environment and the culture you're trying to set. Most programmers, most development teams are not going to be interacting with the customer. They're going to be kind of sitting off on their own, and so it largely doesn't matter. A lot of startups, and I think the trend overall is to have a very casual work environment, but it's going to be largely up to you or the policy of the organization to set that. But you can control how you appear. And so whatever you think your appearance, that projection that you're trying to give, that's up to you to determine. Time and priority management. Okay, we can control that. We can control, while we may not have as much time as we'd like in any given day, we control how we use it, and we control what we make a priority and what we don't. So oftentimes I will make to-do lists. I will look at each morning and I will start my day with things I have to do. These are things I need to get done. And at a minimum, my list kind of escalates. This is what has to get done by this morning, this afternoon, by the end of today. This is what I need to get done tomorrow, by the end of this week, next week, the end of the month, and what have you. And so it's an ever-revolving list, but I start my day off with that focus in mind. That way I know I'm being as effective as I can with my time. I'm not going to get everything done, but I'm being as effective as I can. Communications will be overwhelming. You will be bombarded with requests, with emails, with just all sorts of things, especially as a manager and especially with the larger team you get. So managing that effectively is going to become critical. Follow-up management. Okay, one of the hardest things that I run across, at least when I first started managing people, was when I got into trouble employees and I had to set down more disciplinary type action and say, you will do this and I will follow up, and then not following up. So make sure that when you expect somebody to do something, if you expect them to change, if you expect them to deliver, if you expect them to deliver something on time, that they are doing it, that you are following up and enforcing it. And if they're not doing it, deal with it appropriately. Stop it now, because if you allow that behavior to continue, if you say, we need this work done and we need it done by Friday, and people continuously fail to deliver, if you allow it to go once and then twice and then 3 times, you can almost guarantee it's never going to change. Okay, so it has to be, the tone has to be set up front and follow up on the things that you expect your people to do. And then I would encourage you to find a mentor. Find someone else that is in a similar position or that you think you can learn a lot from. Approach them if you don't know them. Ask them to be a mentor. Just be straight up about it. And I think you'll find most of them will probably be pretty receptive to it, especially if it's someone that you're trying to emulate. But learn how they did it. Learn from their mistakes. Learn from their experience, and take advantage of that. Have a mentor. Have two. Have three. Have an entire board. I don't think you can have too many. Well, you probably can, but one really strong one can help go a long way in developing yourself as a leader. Okay, that second bullet there I already talked about, and then yeah, the task list. So I talked about that as well. One other thing with the task list, just kind of an odd thought that popped into my head, is with the communication, the overwhelming amount of communication that we receive on any any given day. It's very hard sometimes to stay focused. Email is a good example, because I have several email accounts that I actively monitor every day based off of the different things that I do, and I get a ton of email every single day. It can get to the point where I can sit down for an hour and a half and say, I got to work on this program right now. I have to get this out for a client. But then I open my inbox, and now I'm dealing with emails, and before I know it, I've spent 2 hours just simply answering and responding to emails. And so one technique that I do in order to help me manage that load is to really segment the day out the best I can and say, okay, from 8 to 9 I start my day. I've reviewed my task prioritization for the day, and now I'm going to look at emails for the next half hour to an hour. Once that time's up, I stop and I move on. I close my inbox. I don't look at it so I can't get distracted. I work on some things for a while, and then I come back and I have a defined set of time and I check my email again. This gets very hard. Okay, especially if you're in a team environment, you have to be handling emails all day. But every once in a while, it's going to help a lot just to try to have structure to your day. Otherwise, you're going to be pulled around by the ebbs and flows of it. And before you know it, you're going to have worked a 10-hour day, and you're going to feel like you haven't accomplished anything, because those things you set out to accomplish that day, you didn't get accomplished because you were chasing all this other stuff that came up that day. So I know it's frustrating. I know it's absolutely frustrating when in this day and age, you send an email to somebody and you almost expect an immediate response, and then somebody doesn't respond. And they're at their desk, they're across the building or across the hall, and they're sitting right there, but they haven't responded to you. And sometimes that's why. So I know it can be frustrating to interact with people like that, but sometimes you have to do it for your own, your own effectiveness. So, all right, that's all I have, and go ahead and get this posted, and we'll get in the discussion boards, and we'll move on to our next week. So, hope everybody has a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next week.